It's finally here. Part 3 of my overviews of the Judge Dredd complete case files from 2000 AD. This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions, and I finally get to talk about my love for Judge Dredd in this part 3. So, join me! So we have finally arrived at part 3 of the Judge Dredd complete case files overviews. This video has been a year in the making, but not really a year in the making. It was just because I wanted to do it last year, right around the months of March and April. But things kept happening. We moved, and I had to read other things. Books were coming out left and right, and here we finally are. Before I go any further, I do want to thank the folks at 2000 AD Rebellion for sending us copies of these complete case files. So big thank you to all those folks over there. And also a big thank you to people like Super Laugh Hard and Partworks, a lot of my viewers that have helped me with my journey in Judge Dredd's world. Oh my gosh, I could not have done this without you. As a matter of fact, I sent an email to Super Laugh Hard about the character of Johnny Alpha and Judge Dredd meeting, and I'm like, when did that happen? And he was like, oh, you're going to need it to read it here, or you can just check out the custom book that I made. So big thank you to those folks. So today we're going to be looking at the Complete Case Files, Volume 13, all the way to 24. That is taking us from the year 1989 to 1996. That's crazy to think about. That is the year I graduated high school. There is a reason why I have Necropolis right there, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And what I usually like to do with each Judge Dredd videos is focus just on one particular story that I really enjoyed. Because what these collect are the chapters from the 2000 AD magazine, so as they call them, progs. And I will put a link in the description of the video with my part 1 and part 2 if you haven't watched those yet. And I strongly recommend watching those because through those you get to experience my journey, because that's when my journey began, was a couple of years ago, reading Judge Dredd for the first time. And man, since Case File 5, I've had a blast. Ups and downs, like everything else, but a blast nonetheless getting to read these for the first time. So, before getting started, you could smash that like button, please. That is a very small thing you can do, but it really goes a long way here on the channel. And subscribe if you're enjoying videos like this, and also ring that little bell. I don't know why I did that. We have a little image down there. Ring that little bell for notifications. That lets you know when our videos are going live. Alright, let's start this journey again with Judge Dredd, the Complete Case Files, Volume 13. Now, in case you haven't seen the other videos and you're like, I don't feel like going back to those videos, well, you should. But I did want to do a little comparison as to the dimensions of the book. These are about as tall as a trade paperback, your standard trade paperback. They're just a little bit taller, and I mean a little bit, and then they are longer than these trades, which are the dimensions of floppies and single issues. So just in case. So here we have Volume 13. This is from the year 1989 to 1990. And by now, we've gotten over some of the big stories. And this really feels like a mission statement to make Judge Dredd a little bit grittier. But there are some really interesting names you're going to be seeing. And I can't show every piece of art, of course. But you have people like Doug Braithwaite working on this book, Barry Kitson, Will Simpson. These people that would eventually blow up, especially when they went over to DC Comics, working on whether it's Superman or Batman or big-time characters. And, of course, John Wagner and Alan Grant. Now, the credits are about to change here in a little bit. They are the main writers of these books. Now, we are in the era of Judge Dredd when it is turning 100% color. You're going to see a lot of color collections in this. However, in this particular volume, Volume 13, they're still transitioning, so there is a lot of black and white in here too. So it's not just colors, and this is the story I wanted to talk about. But I'll come back to this one. I did want to showcase that there is still a lot of color with a different variety of artists working on each one. It's not one continuing story. I'll let you know when it is. Most of these read like an anthology. You just have to know what the idea behind Judge Dredd is. So, Judge Dredd, of course, is a character that appeared in 1977, and I think it was the second here. We'll look at at this, in the second issue of the 2000 AD British magazine. It was an anthology series. So this is the character of Joseph Dredd, and he lives in Mega City. Now, in Mega City 1 is where he is both, well, actually he is judge, jury, and execution. And it's revealed through the previous volumes that he turned out to be, well, no, I'll leave that out. How exactly he came to be, what his lineage is, why he makes the perfect judge, jury, and executioner. And he's not alone. There's a lot of judges, and you're about to see in case you haven't read any of this and are just familiar with the movies. So this is the story of, oh, this was so good, John Cassavetes is dead. So you have this older man right here that looks like he's a hoarder. He's holding newspapers, he's got books there, and in comes the judges. Now this is Benjamin Tono. He is subject to a 59C crime blitz. So that is all the judges coming in and saying that he has committed a crime and they are free to check out his house. And that is because he's hoarding a range of restricted publications, and it's newspapers and novels and other media in here. Now, at the very beginning, he's reading this obituary about John Cassavetes, who died over 100 years ago, and he's thinking to himself, why would anybody keep us from reading this? How would we benefit as a society from reading this particular story? But the best part about this, and by the way, I chose this story over a year ago, like long before anything going on in the news, because it's always been a part of society, somebody choosing what we read and don't read. But I really do love the idea of Judge Dredd actually picking up the newspaper and looking at the obituary and going, they never really thought about it before. Why do we hide so much of the past from them? Who decided what they could or could not know? And I thought that was such a powerful message in this volume that I had to talk about this story. And like I said, I chose this story on my notes. I wrote what story I chose, so I had to go back and find the stories. But that's such a powerful moment, especially for the character of Judge Dredd, who really doesn't question a lot, and he does from time to time. And of course, art varies in here. This is 272 pages, and that is volume 13 of the Complete Case Files. Here we have volume 14. This takes place in the year 1990. Now, the one thing I didn't note is that Judge Dredd takes place, of course, in the future. So this is in the year 2112. And he ages in real time. That's why you'll see him getting older. Now, this volume contains the entire Necropolis storyline. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. It actually has a little more than this. This has a lot more extras, but this is the essential Judge Dredd. You can see that it's in oversized format. It's bigger than the case files, so the art looks bigger. The paper stock is the same, though. It's just thick, glossy paper. And this is what the artwork looks like. This is such an awesome freaking story. So let's actually talk about that. So you can purchase it that way, but if you're getting the case files, or if you want a taste of the case files, I strongly suggest going with this one. So this is one of the most epic storylines in here. You're going to see John Wagner write most of this, Will Simpson, Carlos Esqueda, of course the co-creator of Judge Dredd, and Jeff Anderson supplying most of the artwork. And of course John Wagner is the co-creator of Judge Dredd with Carlos Esqueda. So this is one of the most epic storylines from Judge Dredd. And my gosh, this volume just blew me away. And the problem with this volume blowing me away is that it kind of set the bar so high. So it's crazy. Now, this follows the events of a story, or one of the progs in here, called The Tale of a Dead Man, where, I'm not going to go into detail, but Judge Dredd resigns from being a judge. So it's crazy because the whole Justice Department kind of starts falling apart because they consider Judge Dredd a symbol of justice. And that knowledge of his resignation affects public order and everybody that respected him. So then we have the introduction of a character named Kraken, who is the clone brother of Judge Dredd. Now, Judge Dredd is no stranger to clones, and I'll just leave it at that. But he is going to play the role of Judge Dredd while Judge Dredd is hanging out, well, elsewhere, I'll say that. He's going to assume the identity of Judge Dredd. And he ends up falling under the psychic influence of the Sisters of Death. And now Mega City 1 is under the siege of the Dark Judges. I swear, the Dark Judges are some of my favorite characters. Ever since Volume 5 of the Case Files, I wanted to see more of them. Changed my mind a little bit later on, and I'm not going to go into detail as to why, but I'm curious as to what people think about the era of... Well, I'll save that for a surprise. Hold on. So, this is that type of story. So what's going to happen when the body count starts rising and then hope starts running out? Will the judges be able to turn the tide back? What's going to happen? Or is Judge Dredd ever going to come back? Because he's left. Of course he's coming back. The freaking title's called Judge Dredd. He's not going to leave them forever. But oh man, this was such a classic storyline. This one also has 272 pages. Volume 15, taking us from 1990 to 1991. So, one thing you're going to notice in here is not only does this collect the Progs, 2000 AD Prog 700 to 735, but also something called the Judge Dredd magazine, 1.01 to 1.10. So, things are going to start to be collected in these case files that appeared outside of the 2000 AD anthologies. This is the first time Garth Ennis wrote Judge Dredd, and it's some early Garth Ennis stuff. Carlos Esquera, Steve Dillon. Oh my gosh, I have to pick a story with Steve Dillon and, of course, Garth Ennis. I can't think of books like Preacher without thinking of them, or even the Punisher run for Marvel Knights. But, oh man, this one, yeah. Okay, so let's talk about this one. So, in the aftermath of Necropolis, of course, like I said, Judge Dredd returns to full duty. He's out policing the streets of Mega City 1, and this volume works more like a collection of short stories again. We just went through this big epic story, continuing from one prog to another, and this one works more like a series of little short tales. There is a background and subplots that run through it, but for the most part, yeah, this one works as short tales. And the story I picked, and I had to pick it, is this one here. This is Emerald Isle. And this shows Judge Dredd tracking down a terrorist who assassinated a foreign ambassador. And he ends up going to the city of Murphyville, which Garth Ennis, again, writing this. And Murphyville has become like a theme park with stereotyped images from this island's past. And it's like Ireland, is what really it becomes. And there's like these little cottages here. It's, like I said, stereotypes of Ireland. So Dredd has to team up with the Irish Judge Joyce. And they go out for drinks. And, you know, they have a good bond. And then the terrorists want to overthrow the theme park and to get rid of all of these people that are in charge of it. The reason I picked this is not just because of Steve Dillon and Garth Ennis working on it, but it was nice to see Garth Ennis. It felt like he was more comfortable, because reading Garth Ennis through Judge Dredd, and he's not alone, right? Like, you still have John Wagner writing some of the stories, Alan Grant writing some of the stories, but when Garth Ennis was writing the stories by himself, it just kind of felt like he didn't have a voice for Judge Dredd. Not quite yet. I felt like he was more comfortable in the Emerald Isle storylines, and that's why I decided to choose this particular story. This one, case files here, let's go to the end. And then it was nice to see a judge from another part of the world, which we'll see a lot of later on. This one has 320 pages. I did want to show you what the artwork looks like here in the Dredd magazine, sorry. And these tend to be a little more mature than the Prog collections. Okay, volume 16 with a very orangey design. I love that they're all different colors. You have red, white, gray, and green. I love it. Garth Ennis now taking over a little bit more of the stories here. It's still John Wagner and Alan Grant writing the majority of this. You do have, again, the return of not just Steve Dillon, but you also get Glenn Fabry's artwork in here. And, of course, he ended up doing a lot of the covers for Preacher. Actually, all the covers for Preacher. Dean Ormstern doing some of the artwork in here. And there's one particular artist I want to talk about, which is the story I picked. It's not my favorite story, but it's one I wanted to talk about just because it is rare to see, I think, this artist working on Judge Dredd. I'm not going to lie, in this volume is when I started to see that Judge Dredd started to become a little bit of a mixed bag. Because Garth Ennis takes over, like I said, about half of the book. By now, Garth Ennis has taken over about half of the book, and his stories once you go from John Wagner and Alan Grant, it just feels different. It feels like he was writing a lot of social commentaries here. And there's nothing wrong with that because there are a lot of writers do. But I feel like he was having less fun with the character. Now, when you get... I almost wanted to talk about this one here. The story of... what is Rapture, I think is what it's called. This one here, which is a complete alien ripoff. I don't care. Raptar, sorry. It's about Judge Dredd fighting this big alien creature. I don't care if it's a ripoff. It works for me. I loved it. But what I wanted to showcase was this really weird story right here. Judge Dredd, I was a teenage mutant ninja priest. Sam Keith is the artist on this. And this is all about this character known as Mussolini, who's getting revenge for what the priest did to him in this religious cult. So pretty much his origin is that he accidentally was flushed down when he was getting baptized. So he's come back as a teenage mutant ninja priest killer. So he's getting revenge for what the priest did to him. And I mainly wanted to focus on this because it's pretty graphic. This is part of the Dredd magazine. And it also features the artwork of Sam Keith. But this is, I feel like when Garth Ennis started to have fun with this character. So you have your basic plot, right? I mean, obviously we're talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And the baby going down to the sewers, getting mutated, being trained by a rat. His name turns out to be Mussolini. But the real plot is that his mom lied to him. She was the one that was dressed up as a giant rat. His real name was Kevin Eastman. And she does have a reason why she tricked him. And I thought this story was so ridiculous, but it was just fun to read. And then you had Sam Keith on artwork, which I don't know how often he drew Judge Dredd. This is the only time I remember seeing his art in color like this. But yeah, I had to go with that one. There were better stories in here, but that's the one I wanted to showcase. And I just want to showcase a little bit of what the artwork looks like. So it does range. By now it's gone full color. Most of these are full color. There's a couple of exceptions where a couple of stories are in black and white. And this one has 336 pages. Now we're looking at volume 17. And by now Garth Ennis has taken over a majority of the stories. John Wagner still writing a couple of them. This is one of the few collections that actually has some of the extras in the back. One name you're going to notice here is Sean Phillips. However, that's not the story I wanted to talk about. Carlos Esquera coming back to doing some of the artwork. But I did want to talk about one particular story, and then we'll look at the extras. Now, it is very important that before you read this one particular story, you go back. 2008, he started collecting the Judge Dredd restricted files. And the restricted files are collections of annuals and things that were not in the Dredd magazine and things that were outside of the 2000 AD magazine. So Top Dogs is the story that I strongly suggest reading before here, because in this story is where he meets the character of Johnny Alpha. And Johnny Alpha is the character from Strontium Dog. And you get to learn a little bit about their background. Like, do you need to read it? I mean, I strongly suggested, but in case you don't have this or don't have access to it, then not really. I don't think it's going to take anything away from the story I'm choosing in here. The story in here is called Judgment Day. Here, let's actually... It all starts here, and it is a crossover between the 2000 AD stories and the Dredd magazine. I think it's the first time I've seen that done. This story is by John Wagner. The script is by Garth Ennis. And you have Carlos Esquera doing some of the artwork in here with a few others. So the story is all about this character named the Necromagnus and how he is raising the dead in Mega City. Now, the only thing you need to know is that the character of Strontium Dog, or Johnny Alpha, is in the future. He is in the year 2178, while most of the present time in this story takes place in the year 2114. So he's a few decades away. He travels back in time to take down the Necromagnus. So he has to team up with Dredd. Now, it's an unlikely alliance to happen because of everything that happened in their past with that annual, and they don't get along that well because they're very similar characters. The character in Strontium Dog was actually created by John Wagner and Carlos Esquera, the same people that created Judge Dredd. But I can tell that it told different types of stories in that particular magazine than it did in the Judge Dredd storyline. So Mega City 1 looks a little bit different. Now, I'm not going to reveal how that story ends, but I really like that. I like when there's a crossover, and I like when characters have to team up that are very much alike, so that's why they don't really get along. And in the back, yeah, is when you actually start seeing some prog covers, which I miss, because they did that in the very first few volumes, and I don't know if the latest printings, including that one right there they are together. And I don't know if it was the later printings that they stopped doing them, or did they just stop doing them, but I miss these, because I really like the covers. They don't have to collect all the covers, and I know there are other books collecting covers, but it was just nice. Now, this was all in 1992, when this 17th volume was written. Now we're at volume 18, 1992 to 1993, and there is a name here that I assume this is some of his early work too, Mark Millar. Right underneath Garth Ennis. John Wagner and Alan Grant coming back from time to time to the character, of course. And here's your credits right here. Some of the artists that wrote or drew a lot of this stuff in here, including Barry Kitson. He sticks around for a while. Anthony Williams and Greg Staples. Carlos Esqueda. I love that he keeps coming back. But John McCrae. And John McCrae is the artist. Every time I think of him, I think of Hitman. Of course, Hitman was written by Garth Ennis. So now we've gone through two big storylines. We've had Necropolis and Judgment Day. And it seems like during this time, Judge Dredd is just looking for some kind of direction. Seems like there's a little bit of confusion going on. I don't know if John Wagner was focusing on other stories, and they kind of left it for Garth Ennis to take over. But now I'm enjoying the stories, or the way that Garth Ennis is writing Judge Dredd. And I'm curious how people, when they started reading these stories, was that transition weird, like having somebody like Garth Ennis come in, or did you just fall in love with it? And I felt the same way about Mark Millar, too. Now, I chose the story in here of Raider. But before I talk about Raider, I did want to show you a little bit of the story that's happening here. This has one of the longer stories, the Mecanismo. They're pretty much where the judges decide to start experimenting with robot judges. And of course, that's never going to go right. Now, this story arc lingers for a few volumes. So it doesn't wrap up here. So now we're starting to see some robot judges. But the story I wanted to come back to was Raider. This is written by Garth Ennis and drawn by John Burns. By the way, now they're crediting the letterers. I love that. So everybody's getting credit. The reason I chose this story is because it's the story of ex-judge Carl Raider. He's become a vigilante, and he's targeting those that are preying on citizens. He ends up attacking this base of, what is his name, Mark Darrison, who's been running this protection racket. He ends up killing a bunch of Darrison's men and cuts off Darrison's hands. So now Raider flees as the judges arrive. So Judge Dredd is going after somebody that used to be a judge, but has crossed that line into being a vigilante. So I love that, because, not only does this kind of foreshadow what Garth Ennis did for The Punisher, but also I just like the idea of somebody that is all about the law and following that strict law, and has quit himself and has probably thought about the vigilante way to go after somebody like that. Now, this also journeys a little bit into the Cursed Earth, where they go out into orbit and stuff. And that ending, man, I don't know. This was one of my favorite stories in this particular case file. And speaking of this case file, this one here has 304 pages. And I showed the whole robots and no extras in the back. Moving on to Case Files Volume 19. This is 1993. Now we have Garth Ennis, Mark Millar, John Smith, John Wagner, and a newcomer has arrived. Grant Morrison. Man, if you had shown me this, and I see all these names, I think the big one that's missing is Alan Grant, too, from there. But I would have flipped out. I'm like, what the hell is that comic book, and how can I get it? Like, all those names that, eventually would just blow up, especially when they came over to DC. And these artists, too. Like, a lot of these artists came over to DC as well. Now, this one starts off with this five-part Garth Ennis storyline. It's called The Chieftain. It's pretty much a Scottish flavored take on the outlaw Josie Wells, which I'm okay with. Then we get a couple of Mark Millar stories. But the story I wanted to show is that of Inferno. Grant Morrison and Carlos Esquerra. If you have Grant Morrison writing a Judge Dredd story, then that's the one you choose. This one, I think it lasted about 12 progs. I want to say it was 12 parts. But this is when Mega City 1 is attacked by a bunch of ex-judges who've escaped from their lunar prison. So Morrison decides to just have fun with that. So now it's up to Dredd and the rest of the judges to go and free the city from these ex-judges. And the way that he writes Judge Dredd, holy crap, it feels like reading Batman and Morrison's Bruce Wayne. Freaking awesome. I really like this one. Not the best Judge Dredd story, but holy crap. Now, Carlos Esquerra draws a majority of it, if I'm not mistaken, if not all of it. But I will say that it is a different type of Judge Dredd. It's not like Alan Grant's Judge Dredd or even, I would say, not even Garth Ennis' Judge Dredd. It feels more like reading a character of Batman, Morrison's Batman, but can take it a step further. And that's why I chose it. And it's obviously, you know, whenever you have Grant Morrison, whenever they're writing a story, that's the one you choose, so you can talk about it. And then just a little bit of what the rest of the collection looks like. Yeah, but his Dredd, he's a bit of a vicious bastard. I will say that much. Now, this particular volume of Judge Dredd Case Files has 320 pages. And again, the Dredd magazine stories are all the way in the back. Volume 20. This is 1993 to 1994. And here are your credits. You have John Wagner, Alan McKenzie, John Tomlinson, and Grant Morrison, John Smith, Mark Miller. But it feels like Mark Miller wrote like the first part of this story. Or the first half of the book. There's a lot of Mark Miller stories in here. Hey, this is the one I wanted to talk about. With artwork in here by Dermo Power. So this is the Book of the Dead, where we meet the character of Ramses, who's a judge, an Egyptian judge, who works a little bit different than the character of Judge Dredd. But I love stories when Judge Dredd is taken out of Mega City 1, and that's what this does. We see Judge Dredd pretty much travel to Egypt, or what was Egypt, and handle this mummy type of creature. And like I said, teaming up with the character of Ramses. Now, the ending of this one is a little bit graphic and not what I was expecting. And this is one of those volumes that I remember just kind of putting a halt on. I'm like, okay, I'm going to take a break from Judge Dredd and go read other things. Not because the entire volume was bad, but I think I have been reading them back to back. And this is what I wanted to talk about too, how people felt about the change to the character of Judge Death. Like when Judge Death would show up, dude, I would be so excited. But in these little backup stories with Judge Death, I don't know. Felt like he had a different voice and they were trying to do other things with him. And I don't know if he ended up with his own magazine or not, but it kind of felt like it. This book right here has 320 pages. This particular volume right here. Case Files 21. Big fan of the color. This was a red one. And now you have the return of John Wagner. Now, it's not just the return of John Wagner, but you also get Dan Abnett writing a story or two in here. Alan McKenzie writing some of it. You also have Carlos Esquerra. But it's just good to see both of them back. Both John Wagner and also Carlos Esquerra back to return to true form in this series. And as a matter of fact, the story I wanted to talk about is Wilderlands. So it is John Wagner with Carlos Esquerra. And the story, they both work on from start to finish. So we have the characters of Judge Dredd and this insane chief judge, and just this eclectic cast of characters that end up crash landing on this alien world. The story also introduces us to Judge Vold and Judge Castillo. And then we see the return of the Council of Five. And this particular book actually ends up wrapping up a lot of the loose ends, a lot of ongoing stories, including the one that I was talking about with the Mecanismo program. So this is a really interesting read, but the thing that took me a bit to get used to were the colors that Carlos Esquerra was using on his artwork, because it feels like right now we're looking at those, what I call Malibu colors, the color separation, computer separated colors, and of course, colors that a lot of people were using at Image Comics, Marvel Comics, DC at this time during this particular year. So it took a little bit for me to get used to these like computer generated colors, if you will, because I'm so used to Carlos Ezquerra's artwork. See if I can give you an example. Just looking a little bit like that, like a little bit dirty, a little bit not cleaned up, not defined, to going from that to something like this. So that took me a little bit to get used to, but the story itself was really fun. And like I said, it ended up wrapping up some storylines. And then we get some covers back here. Love it. Love when they add covers, including some Brian Boland covers. There's Judge Death. And they really... I guess I'm not the only one. That guy really blew up over there during this time, huh? This book right here has 320 pages. Moving on to Case Files, Volume 22. And who in the hell is that guy? Well, that's the badass Vatican City Judge Inquisitor, Caesar. Love that guy. Actually, he's part of the story I'm going to be talking about. So, in the fallout of the whole thing that happened in the Wilderlands, we do have a new chief judge now. And it is Judge Volt. I'm not going to say what happened to the previous chief judge, but just going to leave that out. And it's really cool because he has a lot of respect for Judge Dredd, so he works a little bit different in here. And now, again, we have John Wagner come back to the book. This is just showcasing some of the artwork you're going to be finding in here. You have John Burns doing some of the artwork in here, Ashley Wood doing some of the artwork in here, and Grant Morrison also writing some of the stories. But the story I wanted to talk about is The Crusade. Hells yes. This is one of my favorite Judge Dredd stories. This one's written by Grant Morrison and Mark Miller, and actually the artwork in here is by Mick Austin. So you have this ship that has crash landed in the South Pole, and Mega City 1 has decided to send Judge Dredd down there to go and retrieve something very important. It almost feels like a MacGuffin, but that's okay. And Judge Dredd is not alone, because judges from around the world, and that's why I like this, go head to head as they compete to complete this mission, to go and retrieve this item. But what makes it stand out is this guy right here from the Vatican. This is Vatican City Judge Inquisitor Caesar. The only thing I don't like about this story is that there's not enough of him. Like, there's huge battles in here between the judges, twists and turns. You don't know who to trust. Somebody's going around and killing them. And man, there's just some awesome storytelling in here. This goes places that I think they wanted to start taking Judge Dredd. And I really liked it. I really liked the new setting that they were trying to get Judge Dredd into. But some amazing fights and a couple of twists and turns. So I really like this one. So really good story. This particular volume here has 336 pages. And again, the magazines are all the way in the back. And I mentioned how, I forgot about the Strange Case of Bill Clinton. Maybe I should have talked about that one. That's okay. I stick with the Crusade. But the magazines, like I mentioned, were more adult-oriented. It looks like they were taking some chances there. Nothing too graphic, but they were a little more sexual tone and a little more violence in them than the ones that you found in the 2000 AD. And honestly, I'm not the biggest fan of the magazine stories that I found through here. A couple of them do stand out, though. Taking us to the Complete Case Files, Volume 23. And the year is 1995. And why is 1995 so important, or maybe not important? Oh, by the way, the credits are now done this way. I love this, because now it's breaking it down by these chapters, so you don't have to look at the little shield anymore, even though they took away the little shield during these particular volumes. But yeah, they replaced it with things like this. Still a little small font, but now you can see them in big font, like Goodnight Kiss, this story right here. Script by Garth Ennis. The artwork is by Nick Percival. And then the letters are Tom Frame. And it was originally published in 2000 AD, 940 to 948. I love that they do that now. All right, so 1995. What makes it so interesting? What makes it about that year that is so special? That is the year the Stallone movie was happening. And it is back to John Wagner, like, writing the stories. And I know that a lot of people have issues with the Stallone movie, especially if you're a fan of the Judge Dredd comics. Even the creators had something to say about the Stallone movie. But honestly, if I were to go back to my childhood, RoboCop is really the movie that introduced me to the world of Judge Dredd, because RoboCop is straight up Judge Dredd. So if you're a fan of RoboCop and you haven't read Judge Dredd, you're doing a disservice to your brain. But we also see the return of Garth Ennis, too. He writes the story of Goodnight Kiss. So it's good to see him back. Like I said, it took me a while to actually appreciate his writing. And we get the Awakening of Angels. This is the story I wanted to talk about. It's not the best Judge Dredd story. This one is by the team of John Wagner and Carlos Esquerra. Tom Frame doing the lettering. But the reason I like this is the very first time, yes, I could have chosen whatever happened to Bill Clinton, but The Awakening of Angels is the very first time I said to myself, hey, I remember these guys. So all the way in this storyline called The Judge Child, this is the one that I picked. I think I picked that one. I like that one, so sure, I can go back and watch my video, but I think I picked that one as the one that stood out from case file number 4. They introduced the characters of the Angel Gang members. And they resurrect 2 Angel Gang members in this one that were killed in The Judge Child. Now, the story itself is okay. It's not the greatest story. But it was the first time that I was like, hey, that's continuity. That goes back to that particular Prague. I remember that. I remember these guys. And I don't know, it just goes back to being a kid and connecting the dots when I'm reading American comics, going, oh yeah, I remember that issue of X-Men, I remember that issue of Batman, yeah, this is a continuity. And I'm a stickler for continuity. I know that, on my channel, I try to say that, here, I don't know why I'm talking, this is one of the few, by the way, that also has some black and white in here. On my channel, I talk about, hidden gems that are standalone stories, but I love continuity. Continuity to me is so important. I want to be reading the same character that I've been reading about for 30 years, with some changes, of course. And it felt like for the first time that I was getting that out of Judge Dredd. Yes, there's continuing plots, there's continuing stories, but to have the 2 creators go back to a particular story, things like this, what the heck? Didn't think that would happen. Going back to a particular story that I remembered, I was like, oh, this is nice. So I'm not sure if anybody else felt like I'm probably not. I would say more than likely I am alone in choosing that particular story as the one that stood out from this particular batch. This book has 320 pages. Last but not least is volume 24. And I don't know why I haven't done this already, but these are all soft covers. Volume 1 had a limited edition hardcover, and I think that might be the only one. And they all have glued binding. By the time you get to the case files that we're looking at, 13 through 24, they all have this really thick, glossy paper. For the black and white stuff that we've seen in the past, they had the matte paper that the artwork was printed on. So, 1995 to 1996, this volume has 304 pages, and this one is, I think, 50-50. It's split between the magazine and the progs. Actually, I think there's more magazine in this one than progs. But I wanted to talk about The Pit. This story right here, that is John Wagner, Carlos Esquerra, working together again. And yes, just, you get used to the colors. So, in this particular story, it covers Judge Dredd's tenure. So it's an ongoing story. It's not a one-off. And he goes to this isolated area of the city that has kind of become a notorious dumping ground for corrupt and incompetent judges. And he is appointed the sector house chief in order to clean it up. So in here, we also have the introduction of another judge, Judge Galen DeMarco, who seems to have an eye out for our judge. Let's just say that. But this right here showcases a lot of the characters from the Wilderlands, and it also introduces us to the Judge Giant, the son of Judge Giant, which came from the story The Son of Giant, I think is what it was called. And then we get a bunch of new characters that appear through here. So it's one big storyline that just continues, and then this is what the rest of the book looks like. I think it's back to the basics. I like that. We're finally getting out of that, what are we going to do with the character? We had a movie didn't do that well, let's take it back to its roots. So it really does feel like good, epic storytelling. And again, artwork again by Carlos Esquerra. Very nice addition to that story. No extras in the back. And again, this one has 304 pages. And that ends this particular journey of Judge Dredd case files. Hopefully it won't take me another year. Hopefully I can do it at the end of the year with part 4. But I've had a blast. Up and downs, but a blast nonetheless. That, as they say, is that. If you're interested in purchasing any of these books, don't forget to check out our sponsors.
If you're in Europe and you're interested in buying these books, definitely check out Walt's Comic Shop in Berlin, Germany. They have the cheapest pre-order prices, flat shipping rate of €12 for all EU countries, emails answered within 24 hours, waltscomicshop.com, and you can use the code nearmintcondition at checkout and get free shipping for all EU countries with your first order over €40. That's Walt's Comic Shop, your reliable source for omnis and premium collected editions in Europe. Ding!
cheapgraphicnovels.com, your online home for graphic novels and collected editions up to 50% off cover price. They have excellent shipping and prompt and helpful service. Check out their bargain deals for up to 90% off cover price. And don't forget, the CGN also takes pre-orders. That way you don't miss out on the hottest releases. And they are currently running a special promotion for you Minties. If you're a first-time customer, after receiving your order confirmation email, reply back to that email and let them know Near Mint Condition sent you their way. They will then apply a free shipping promotional credit to your next order in the US. Cheap Graphic Novels, your source for the hottest books with the kind of deep discount, quality shipping, and customer service that will keep you coming back for more. And those were some of my favorite stories that were collected in these complete case files. Let me know in the comments down below what some of your favorite Judge Dredd stories are. If you've never read Judge Dredd, strongly recommend going back to part 1 and part 2 and picking out a book that I think is one of the best books, or case files rather. And from this batch, I think you can't go wrong with Case File 14 or the Necropolis Essential Judge Dredd, which you can buy it like that. But if you have any questions, comments, and please comments, let me know what else I can be reading from this wonderful world of Judge Dredd. Leave all your questions and comments down below. And everyone, stay healthy and safe out there. Much love, and I hope to continue this, not next year, but later on this year.